I'm a collection of organic molecules called Carl Sagan.
English language teaching. Under the covers.
Hello and welcome back to ELT Under the Covers Teaching Masters, where we look at people that aren't necessarily teachers but are educators to the masses. Today we are looking at a science educator, Carl Sagan. I'm Neil, our team teacher.
Hello everybody, it's Professor Rich.
So Rich, what do you know about Carl Sagan?
Sagan. Carl Sagan. I always thought Sagan, but okay. What do I know about him? Okay, put him on the spot now. He comes up a lot in terms of, when someone says like, oh, there's this thing we do in teaching and it's based on like this thing, Carl Sagan, dunk, right? Like, for example, people often mention Stephen Krashen, the input hypothesis, right?
Okay.
The input hypothesis is the idea that if you're in an environment where you're exposed to comprehensible input, which means input that you can understand, which is just a little bit more complicated than your current level of language, then your language level will improve.
Right, okay.
So that's Stephen Krashen's theory, the input hypothesis. So he basically said, right, if your language level is, he called it actually, your language level, but let's say that your language level is 5, whatever that means, right? And you want to get to language level 6, then you should be in an environment where you have comprehensible input at language level 6, and your language level will move towards 6. And this idea is one of the foundational rationales for the communicative language teaching, where communicative language teaching is saying, right, we're going to put you in an environment where you're talking to different people on different subjects, listening to a language level that's it should be challenging but comprehensible. And by being in that environment, your language will improve. That's it. I mean, it's not like
maybe you understand 60 or 70% of kind of what's incoming at you or something like that.
Yeah, he doesn't actually specify a percentage.
No? Okay.
He just calls it comprehensible. So I think it's the idea that you do understand it. You understand it, but you don't necessarily understand every word, but you understand it.
Okay, so in kind of like lay terms, it's like when we're talking about grading something, and not in like giving it marks, but in like making it level specific. So when you have books for elementary students, year 1, class 1, whatever, that those books are for that reading level, or like a little bit more advanced than that reading level to help them to stretch them out a little bit and kind of move them further up.
Yeah, something like that.
This input hypothesis is actually very related to Carl, Mr. Sagan, because that's what he's kind of doing, isn't he? He's maybe part educator, part science communicator, and taking these complex concepts and trying to make them a little bit more graded, a little bit more digestible and understandable, comprehensible for the general masses. And that's what he's kind of known for being this guy that can take these big concepts, complex ideas, convey them in an engaging, understandable manner, and often it's you don't feel like it's you understand something totally, but it kind of pries the door open, and then it starts to let in the possibility of, actually, maybe I know a little bit about science, and then you kind of start to get a bit inspired to learn a bit more. You go further down the rabbit hole. Basically, he's the cannabis, the marijuana of science. He's a gateway to the harder physics down the road.
Nice.
I'm sure people will love that an analogy.
I like that. That's really
and
good.
he's further been taken over by Brian Cox that we have in the UK, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, but all of these, well, that's for another video, and all these other YouTubers, I guess, like Vsauce and I can't remember off the top of my head.
There's a few, isn't there? Yeah,
there's
I know what
quite
you
a
mean.
few.
There used to be a fella called Thunderfoot, but he's not so popular anymore. But he was big like 10, 15 years ago, his science videos.
Mm-hmm.
Thunderfoot, but there's loads of them now, like explaining science really simple terms. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. The concept you're talking about there, in my terminology, I would call it scaffolding.
Yeah.
Which is the idea that with the aid of a competent educator, the student is able to achieve something that otherwise they wouldn't be able to achieve on their own. That's the concept of what is it? It's the zone of proximal development, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The zone of proximal development. The teacher expands the zone of proximal development of the student by scaffolding the activities. And the way that Carl Sagan scaffolds it or whatever is by, I don't know, putting information into bite-sized chunks or something, is it?
Well, we're going to look at that. I think what we'll do first off is I've done a little bit of a overview, a summary, a bio of Carl, and we'll have a look at that, and then we can maybe look at some teaching in action, because we actually got him in a classroom as well. So there we go. But first, let's delve into his life. Carl Sagan was a teaching master, not so much because of his teaching career at the Cornell University in America, but because of his efforts to popularize science and to make it more accessible to the general public. He was the first modern science communicator and has since been followed by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox. His magnum opus was the Cosmos series. We consider him to be a teaching master because he was able to communicate and to teach not just to the brightest minds in science, but to the public as a whole.
Sound like you were pronouncing his name correctly there, so I think you were right. What did you call him? Sagan or something?
I don't know. I'm just calling him Carl.
But whatever
you
said in that video, it sounded right to me. Yeah. So wait a minute. You basically just said what we talked about, that he makes science more accessible. Mm-hmm. He wasn't particularly known for his teaching career, but it was how he made science accessible. So what I want to know is, how did he make science accessible?
Well, he had his, as I referred to, his magnum opus, the Cosmos TV series, which is basically would be like Planet Earth, David Attenborough's Planet Earth, but about the cosmos, about space and all that entails. I think we can look at a little bit of that, but first what we should do is actually look at him in the classroom, because we've got some of him going into a classroom with some young learners. So let's have a look at that.
I want to give to people who As a child, it was my immense good fortune to have parents and a few teachers who encouraged my curiosity. This was my 6th grade classroom. I came back here one afternoon to remember what it was like. I brought some of the breathtaking pictures of other worlds that had been radioed back by the Voyager spacecraft in their encounters with Jupiter and its moons. Okay, this is Callisto, which is... What is a Callisto? I want a Callisto. Now you got it. What is it? It's the outermost big moon of Jupiter. Who is this guy? Europa! Another Europa. A black and white picture of a ring of Jupiter. There you go. That's a prize for honesty. You didn't get a second. You're right. Which one would you like? Okay. No. You didn't get a second. Every one of us begins life with an open mind, a driving curiosity, a sense of wonder. I thought it might be fun if we now had some questions.
Why is the Earth round? Why isn't it square or any other shape?
That's a good question. I like that question. It's a question I've asked myself. And the answer has to do with gravity. The Earth has a strong gravity. If you were to make a mountain very high, higher than Everest, you know, it's the biggest mountain on the Earth, it would be crushed by its own weight. You see, gravity pulls everything towards the center. So any really big bump on the Earth is crushed. But if you had a small object, a tiny world, the gravity is very low, and then it can be very different from a sphere. I think I have here a world that isn't a sphere. Here. Look at this one. See? It's lumpy. It's a lumpy world. Looks like a potato, right? There's a large potato orbiting the planet Mars. This is one of the moons of Mars. And that's a perfect example of it. You can have big departures from a sphere if your gravity is low. Now, a question in the front. Okay.
Is the sun considered part of the Milky Way galaxy?
Sure. You're considered part of the Milky Way galaxy. Everything except other galaxies is part of the Milky Way galaxy. The sun is one star. There's a few 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. And around each star, maybe, it's a whole bunch of planets. And on one of those planets is life. And one of the life forms on that planet is you. So you're a part of the Milky Way galaxy, too.
So, I guess, you know, obviously it's not him teaching full-time in that. It's probably just like a demo class, you know, just for that. But it's kind of like a snippet. At least he's very enthusiastic about science and cosmos and learning. And that definitely comes through.
So, yeah, I think, first of all, those questions seem like they were set up. But I can't imagine a kid asking, like, is sun a part of the Milky Way galaxy just spontaneously from nowhere? There has to be some setup there. But he obviously comes across as a very good teacher because he's got a good teaching personality, hasn't he? Mm-hmm. You know, kind of enthusiastic, friendly, funny, like nice analogies. You know, doesn't start waffling about scientific nonsense.
Mm-hmm. He's talking to the right. He's talking in the right way to the right audience.
Yeah, and you can tell that he enjoys it, which I think makes a difference as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'd love to have more context of what they were actually doing in that class, you know, what that activity was, because, you know, he's handing out these papers. It looked like there was like information on the back. You know, I would like to get a bigger scope or better idea of, you know, what, you know, the practice was there. What was he doing with that? Because often you don't generally do that, right? You don't just be like start handing stuff out. There's always kind of like some, you know, prep or, well, for me, I always try to make sure that, you know, everything is before I give out paper or, you know, that's probably involved in an activity. You know, I go over the instructions first and check the instructions, and because as soon as something, I found, especially with young learners, as soon as something goes into their hands, then that's like, what is this? What do I do with this? And then they're not listening. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
This is the eternal problem of these videos that we find, though, isn't it? That we always want to see more of the teaching. What we really want is the fly on the wall experience of actually getting the full class and being able to break it all down. Mm-hmm. Whereas what you actually get a lot of the time is kind of the highlights or the spicy chunks or the setups. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was a bit of a setup. You know, I think the camera crew or whatever said to these kids, ask this question, you know, and then they filmed them asking it, and he gave a good answer. It still gives you some idea, but yeah, it'd be great to see more of that, to see the authentic teaching, especially in this situation, because it it is interesting, and the handouts were interesting as well, and quite specific. I mean, for that age group to be talking about Europa and the moon of Mars and stuff like that, that's amazing, really. I don't think I in an educational institution, I've never studied the moons of planets, actually, and it's something I'm interested in. So the fact that I've never studied it means that I guess in the syllabus, it's not something you would cover unless you did like physics at university, maybe, because I did A-level physics. We didn't do about we did a tiny bit about the moons of planets, but we didn't go into the specifics. He's there handing out photos of like the different moons of planets and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of exciting, because the way he's doing it, it's like, oh, here's a Europa for you and a whatever, and they're interesting pictures, and the kids
What is
are
a
looking at him,
Callisto?
talking about
A
them.
Calypso?
Yeah, Callisto, whatever it was. Yeah, I've never even heard of that. I don't know where it is, but it sounds interesting. I want to know more about it. So
yeah, no, I kind of get the feeling that he was kind of doing discovery. He's just kind of like handing these out and be like, okay, you tell me, what do you see here? I'll give you the name, but like, what do you think that entails? What is that? Is that a planet? Is it a star? What's the difference?
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know. Talk among yourselves, and then we'll bring it back together. That kind of
Yeah,
feels
funny,
like something that I would do, something like that. It's almost like
I
having
agree.
realia.
Yeah. It feels almost CLT, doesn't it? It feels almost communicative language teaching in the way it's coming across. There's definitely a teacher's X factor there with his personality as well.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a bit of a controversial thing to say, or maybe not, but it goes a little bit to a topic we've talked about before, about the idea of what you do in the classroom versus who you are, or what you do versus how to be. And he, regardless of what he does in the classroom, which looked good anyway, but how he is in the classroom was a big deal. It's a big part of his style of teaching. It was how he is in the classroom. And so then we get this idea of, well, does that mean that some people are good teachers and some people are bad teachers, and that's the end of it? I don't think it's quite that simple. I think you can learn. You can learn to be a different way in the classroom. You can take on classroom personas, and it's a question of finding a classroom persona that is good for the students as well, isn't it? Because there are classroom personas which people can fall into, which aren't necessarily that good.
Yeah, and I think it's gotta be something that lends itself to you as well. Like I've known teachers that like he's kind of really enthusiastic and like blah, here he's there, he's dynamic, he's moving around. But then I've known teachers that are kind of like have a very monotone voice and they just stand in the middle, and you're like, oh, this guy's gonna fail in a class of like young kids, but he's they have like a sharp wit or something like that, and it kind of draws them in, because I think of like we looked at Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers is just so calm. He's just like, okay, we're going to look at there's planets out there and stuff like that, and Carl's just like bouncing around. He's like, here's the moon, and blah 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 blah. But they both work, and I think it really has to kind of fit with the personality of the whoever is the teacher, and then it's kind of like maybe just turning that up to 11. I feel like it's like pro wrestling or something like that. It's like you were seeing Stone Cold or the Undertaker or the Rock. You're just seeing that person, but they're kind of amplifying to a sensational degree that personality. It's almost like it's got to be a congruency there.
Yeah.
How do you get there? I don't know. I think that's probably for another video of how you find your teaching persona. That'd be an interesting one.
That's a series, really. I think how you find your teaching persona, it's also, I think it's an ongoing project with potentially no ending.
Yeah.
but it's certainly something that requires refining, reforming over time, and questioning occasionally. You know, it's interesting, and you get kind of a little bit stuck in your ways and stuff about things as well, and then decide, should I question this, should I not? There was an interesting suggestion recently. Someone watched me and wondered whether I spoke a bit too loud,
Really?
which I found interesting because I do have a loud voice, and so I put it to a vote with the students. I said, "Oh, would you like me to speak quieter?" And no one voted for me to speak quieter. Actually, they all liked the fact that I was loud, so I decided not to take that advice.
But is that kind of like those students stay with you because they like that you speak loud? You know, like
these aren't private students.
You don't include the opinions of students that don't that come and do a demonstration class and like, it's not a teacher for me.
You're absolutely right that is a factor. But because they're not private students, they're institutional. They don't really have a lot of choice.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have a really strong dislike of the teacher to get moved, you know, to actually go and speak to someone and say you want to move to another class, you don't like that, you know, that would be quite a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's relative. I mean, there's kind of a social pressure issue that, you know, if no one puts their hand up, then someone else is unlikely to put their hand up as well. But, you know, I tried to phrase it in a way that I wasn't fishing for an answer, you know. I was kind of like, oh, do you think I should speak a bit quieter? You know, that kind of thing, just to try and make it.
Yeah.
You sure? Okay.
Like
so everyone who wants me to keep speaking loud, put your hand up, kind of thing.
Well, I think with
everyone puts their hand up. So
just going quickly back to the teaching personas, you know, as you say, it's an ongoing process, and you know, you get the bare bones, you know, like create your own teacher persona after you go through your sort of training and stuff like that, and then you kind of lean into your personality. But it's always good to kind of like add strings to your bow, you know, like put in a bit of music, have some puppets or something like that, and you know, whatever you do, try something different. You know, if you're watching Carl Sagan, can you do something like him? Can you know, adopt part of that? Give it a whirl one class and see how it goes.
I thought when you said if you're watching, I thought you were saying whether he's watching. I think he's dead,
always watching. He's always watching us from above. Is he still alive? He's in the cosmos now. No, he died when he was 62. Right. He had some bone marrow disease.
Relatively young, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're talking a while back now. But maybe now would be a good time to jump into what he's most known for, Cosmos, and have him. We can kind of see some of the video teaching.
Okay, great. Let's do that.
In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say
love his voice
is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about?
I don't know.
Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean, absolutely flat, and that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland, a land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in Flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business.
Yeah, that is nice.
Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us Flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into Flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. The three-dimensional creature is an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. Hello, says the three-dimensional creature. How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension. Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity.
He's talking to an apple.
Three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter Flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in Flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches Flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in Flatland.
Oh, very good.
And
I like that.
as the apple were to descend through, slither by Flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above Flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in Flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing Flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, for heaven's sake, what's happened to you? And the poor square has to say, well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up. And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it. And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself an equal length. That makes a square. Move that square an equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand,
I used to think about this quite
casts
a lot.
a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in two dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in two dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those three directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a fourth physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a four-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines. And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.
There we go.
Yeah,
He's explaining about the fourth dimensions.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating. An excellent teaching style. And I mean, it's difficult entirely for me to judge because this is something that I've thought about a lot, and I know about the Tesseract already, and it's something that I've considered. I wonder. I guess it's a question of who the audience is as well. Is it people who kind of know a little bit about it, or absolute beginners? But
Well,
the
it's just
certainly
the general public, I guess. So the average.
Well, certainly the representation of the square I thought was brilliant, and how the square would perceive someone entering from the 3rd dimension into a flatland, and then here the square's experience of flying around in a 3rd dimension. And I found it very interesting how he said it would seem like he's looking inside. He's looking like inside houses and inside people.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it would seem like to someone who's a 2-dimensional object going into the 3rd dimension.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, whoa, I'm seeing like inside people. I thought that was quite a unique kind of an interesting take that I hadn't heard before. It makes you think that if we went 4th dimension, is that what it would be like? It would be like we'd be like seeing through walls. Yeah, we would, wouldn't we? We'd be seeing through the walls. We'd be seeing through people. That if we could see suddenly in the 4th dimension.
Yeah.
So
would we even have the apparatus to see in the 4th
well,
dimension?
We definitely don't. I mean,
yeah.
that's because it's a thought experiment, so we don't need to consider practical implications. But yeah, no, we wouldn't have the apparatus. I mean, as far as we're aware, photons of light don't operate in the 4th dimension either. So it wouldn't work at all. But in a theoretical thought experiment, it's still interesting. So the way he explains it is it's nice, and a lot of it seems to come to the way that he comes across as a person. I think really helps a lot. But we can see other elements here of his pedagogy, such as his materials were excellent, and his choice of the way that he sort of brings everyday objects into it and makes it kind of mildly humorous. I think that's really good as well. Like how he'll say like, oh, for some reason it's an apple, whatever.
Yeah,
this
like,
object has come into the world,
entirely
which for some reason
bonkers.
looks a little bit like an apple. Yeah, he would think he's entirely bonkers. Yeah, so there's like these kind of interspersed like everyday humor combined with this seemingly esoteric subject of theoretical physics.
I think it's a really key point because what we get is nowadays we're getting more and more access to information and education, so they think, and new ways to present that, graphics and all the video and audio and stuff like that. And there's always like it feels like there can be a bit of a push to kind of really jazz it up and conceptualize and like do these amazing animations of like this 2D, 3D, then 4D, and how that would look, and with all the bells and whistles. And often it's easier, well, maybe easy is not the word, often it's better to use more familiar objects and ways of presenting information, because it's something that you would have to hand for an educator, or to actually keep costs down in the classroom. If that's all you need is like a little bit of paper and an apple and all that stamp and all that sort of stuff. But I think it makes it less out there and more kind of, as I keep repeating, familiar. It's closer to the person. It's something that they have that's been reused, and it's demonstrating imagination as well. And I think the more that you could kind of play within someone's realm of reality when presenting new information and new concepts, that easier it is for them to accept them. Like if he's talking about 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, and he's using like weird shapes and stuff like that, and like in a graphics form or whatever, then it can kind of be a bit too esoteric. It's a bit too out there. But if it's if he's using an apple and he's using pieces of paper and showing, I think that works best. When you see those physics demonstrations, and you're talking about nuclear power and gravity and like how Earth moves or something like that, it's rather than showing all that in a big graphics, it's often like easier to kind of show, like when they have that demonstration of to show how the space curves, and they have the blanket and they put the balls on the blanket, and it shows bigger balls create more of a divot and all that sort of thing, and students can kind of all hold that and then participate in it. I think all those experiments work better when it's based within a reality that's closer to what the students know than to kind of just and this is what space looks like, and this is all this, and you're like, you can't, how do you connect to that?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's personalization in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, really. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, it's bringing it into the context that people are familiar with.
And it allows the students to explain that to other people as well. And I think that's a really key concept, because I noticed this with my kids is when I talk about Fanny hates it because when I at night, we've got into the habit of we read the encyclopedia, and I just kind of ask him questions about the pictures, and we talk about concepts, and if it's something he asks a question, if it's something he's interested in, I'll see if there's information on the page that I can kind of like explain, or like especially like dinosaur books, they always have the height comparison. So it's like, well, this would be the size of a house, and what do you think if it's the size of a house and this is how tall you are, is this a dinosaur that you'd be afraid of? Or and when you look at dinosaurs, he's got sharp teeth, he's got flat teeth, why do you think he's got sharp teeth? And and then I'll explain stuff to him, and I'm trying to do it in a way that's graded, like Mr. Carl Sagan, and then he will take that and then try to explain that to his mum on the walk to the school the next day. And he'll be like, look at my teeth now, look at Lucy, our dog's teeth. It'd be like, oh look, they're a bit more pointy, and Mom, because there's loads of slugs and snails around it. Remember, and be like, look, why is it slime? Do you think you can eat that slime? He's just mansplaining to for the walk. But if he can't connect, I'm joking, but if he can kind of but if he can't do that, if it's this graphical representation of the cosmos, or dinosaurs or whatever, because he can't show that, he's not got a toy dinosaur with him, but he can kind of point to things that are related to him that he has or has in his surroundings. Yeah.
Okay, it's very good. I didn't quite get the encyclopedia thing that you were talking about, though.
Oh yeah, I use that as a reference. I used to read stories with him, But now
Right.
I've got a whole bunch of encyclopedias, like an encyclopedia on dinosaurs, on animals and stuff, and we just flick to a couple of different pages, and if something catches his eye, we just he asks me questions and be like, oh, what's that? And be like, oh, do you know? Or I ask him a question, do you know what this is? What do you think this does? That sort of thing.
Right. Okay.
Just context to like
Oh, so
why
it's just
why he's explaining why he's explaining to his mum stuff rather than a story, because he doesn't repeat stories, I've found, as much. He likes to repeat facts and things that he's learned.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Yeah, that's great. Well,
Yeah.
that's good. It's very interesting that you found that.
Well, you try different things, right?
Yeah.
Carl actually has some views on education that I think you might find interesting, and we've got a snippet of an interview if you want to have a look.
You go talk to kindergarten kids or first grade kids, you find a class full of science enthusiasts, and they ask deep questions. What is a dream? Why do we have toes? Why is the moon round? What's the birthday of the world? Why is grass green? These are profound, important questions. They just bubble right out of them. You go and talk to 12th grade students, and there's none of that. They've become leaden and incurious. Something terrible has happened.
Yeah, so one of the things later on in his career, he was very critical of the public education, in that he thought that there was too much institutionalization, in that we're feeding the facts rather than or pushing the facts and information rather than getting students to kind of inquire more about it. And I thought I'd throw that in there for a little bit of spice. Do you have any take on that?
Yeah, massive. I kind of wish we'd started with that, actually, because I've got loads to say about it. So this is an interesting idea. It's interesting that you said the critical of the public institution, because I think it's not necessarily only the public institution, although public institutions perhaps are more guilty of it. And this is something which goes back to the foundation of mass education, which would be Industrial Revolution, end of the Victorian era in England.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you have to very rapidly transform an illiterate population into people who can work in a factory and therefore do basic maths and read signs. And under that circumstance, you don't give a shit if they're creative or inquisitive. You don't care about those skills. You actually you don't want people to be creative and inquisitive. You don't want them to ask the questions. You just want them to do what they're told.
Mm-hmm.
When the sign says don't press that, you don't press it. If you get 3 iron bars and there's one more iron bar, the answer is 4, right? Why is it 4? I don't care. I don't give a shit whether you want to know why it's 4. It's 4. You need to do the maths. So this is what that system was based off. And if you remember, when we study Victorian education in school, it's very much the Simmons, what's 7 times 6? Sir, it's this, sir. Okay, Simmons, sit down. It's like stand up, do it. Boom. If you get it wrong, whack with the ruler,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was the Victorian education system. It's a yes-no system. And under that system, we heavily stigmatize mistakes. None of those kids want to volunteer an answer unless they're sure it's right. Because being wrong is bad. You get whacked, right, if you're wrong. So people become afraid of being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea has carried on into education systems everywhere, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
The origin, as far as I'm aware, is Victorian England. There could be other origins as well, though. I don't know more about the history of it beyond that, but it's everywhere now. And being wrong is something that people are very much afraid of. People want to be right. They always want the error correction. They always want to know what the right way of doing something is before they try it. And this transformation begins at a young age, which is what Carl Sagan is identifying there. He talks about how kindergarteners are inquisitive and curious. They want to know all kinds of different things, and they will have a go. They'll ask interesting and weird questions, like, for example, why is the Earth round? Why is it round? Why isn't it a square?
Yeah.
And you can imagine even at a parental level, even if we don't consider the school system necessarily, you can imagine at a parental level, a parent who has gone through the horrible school system that's discouraged them from being inquisitive and made them think in terms of, 4 + 4 is 8. That's right. Anything else is wrong. And the reason you're going to school is to get a job in a factory or the modern equivalent. You're going to school to get the piece of paper to get the job. It's about being right or wrong. That when they're kindergarten, when their young child asks them, Mummy, why is the world not a cube? They might indulge it a little bit. Oh, yeah, well, I'm not so sure, darling, but that's an interesting question. Imagine if they ask it when they're 12, a bit older, or even younger than that, maybe 10. At what age will parents stop indulging that? Not all of them. I mean, some parents very good, very creative. They will indulge that. But you can certainly imagine a number of parents who would start to react negatively to that question. What do you mean? Why is the world not a cube? Of course, it's not a cube. That's a silly question. You know what I mean? That kind of attitude, especially if we think around the world as well, because the Anglosphere is very progressive relatively. So if we consider like Southeast Asia, continental Africa and stuff like that, how would people act if a 10-year-old starts asking,
why are you even thinking about that? You should be thinking about going to work.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
something like that.
Get your head out of the clouds.
Right, get your head out of the clouds, stop asking the weird questions, stuff like that. And this is all tied into this idea that we beat creativity over the head. And we try to say that, look, it's all about being right and not being wrong. And anything else doesn't have as much value. And I think that's really what he's identifying there. And it makes sense to him because he's living in a world where those ideas, curiosity, creativity, thinking in different ways are highly valued. But in a lot of areas of our life, they're still not. And I'm not even sure if that much progression is being made in those areas. I think I would have said in the 90s that there was. And, you had people like Ken Robinson and his famous TED Talk. I'm basically plagiarizing all his stuff now when I'm talking about this. It's all from him. It's all from Ken Robinson. We'll have to do a video on him at some point. But it was his thing, and he talked about the educational revolution. He did that talk, I think, in 2002, where he said, we need to start looking at education in a different way. We need to encourage people to have a go. We need to encourage people to think differently. We need to encourage people to, do their speciality. And he made it very clear. He's not advocating that we encourage people to be wrong. That's not the point. You still encourage people to be correct, to get the right answers, to get effective solutions. But the point is, you don't punish people for having a go or asking questions ever. Never punish someone for asking a question or having a go. Because you can teach it out of them. You can teach that out of them. And he used the Picasso quote, all children are born artists. The trick is to remain an artist as you grow up. So all kids are born creative, and we educate them out of their creative capacity. And I think that's true. And I think that in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of hope that we were going to change this and revolutionize the system a little bit in a way that we stopped doing that. But I don't think we ever did. And I think in a way it's kind of been, it's that the whole movement for that has been a little bit lost. That's how I feel anyway. So,
Well,
and I think
there's
that's what,
I the I know it's talked about, and I know that there's that idea of modern education is encompassed by the four C's, right? The critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity as key components for skills for life and for what should be taught in the system. I think it's the implementation that's the problem, and fit, because they're trying to fit this into this model, as you say, that dates back to, Victorian England, where, it's ticking boxes to get people to a basic level to complete a job or something like that. So it's kind of like the issues with the standardized exams and stuff like that. It just helps you. It's like that you're being taught to the exam rather than just the exam just kind of being a checkpoint, being just used as a checkpoint to go, oh, okay, they've not understood this, we need to go back to that and go over it. Now it's kind of, well, they just teach to that because that's what teachers and education is graded on, and that's how we know it's good or bad. So I think there's a redesign that needs to happen, but how that is done and how it's baked into the cake, that we can see that there is progression with that we can measure it, that we can make sure that for every Carl Sagan out there, that there's not the opposite. There's not like a shit teacher or something like that. Or I'm not even sure shit teacher's the word, because often it could just be an unsupported teacher or something like that. Or a teacher that's just trying to, because it doesn't necessarily. If you're a teacher that's just teaching to the exams to help your students pass the exam so they get good marks and they get a good job, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad teacher. You could be really good at that. It's the whole system that's the problem. So, I don't know. I feel like there should always be something in there where we can kind of measure and see how people are doing, students and teachers, but how that doesn't poison the system, I don't know.
So I think there's two different issues there. The idea of shit teachers is one, and that's a whole different kettle of fish of how do you clean out the systems, how do you encourage teachers who want to be teachers, and as I've said, I've got some opinions on that. I think it was something it's a crumbs under the sheets topic, really, talking about what we can do to improve the quality of the individual teachers, because there's lots of good teachers out there as well. But then there's the system and the educational system and what we can do about that. And as you've highlighted, there's often a lot of good intentions in this kind of area. Everyone bangs on about encouraging creativity in the classroom and all the rest of it. Oh yeah, let's all encourage creativity in the classroom, blah, 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 pay a load of lip service to it. And then I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, then you've got the exam. And then when it comes to that, it's like, well, we're limited by the exam. And it's very difficult for me to make statements that refer to the whole educational system in this regard, because I feel like a foot soldier in the army. I don't know what the hell's happening in the whole battle. I'm just here in this one particular place and I can see that we're losing. I don't know what's happening all over the battlefield. So, when you say stuff like, because you've spoke about how you were quite impressed by the supposed ethos of the kindergarten schools that you were looking at for your kids. That surprised me, because that's not what I see on my area of the battlefield. So that was good to hear. And I would like to know the overall picture. I'd like to know what's going on in other areas of the battlefield, because what I see specifically in my local thing is very negative. The exam that I'm currently teaching is very accuracy focused, even though they say that they want it to be about authentic communication and authentic situations. It's worse than things that I was teaching 20 years ago. Well, I wasn't teaching 20 years ago, but 15 years ago. It's worse than Cambridge English exams from 15 years ago. So it's more accuracy focused, it's more grammar based, and it emphasizes more the idea of being correct. You know, it actually says that in the marking schemes that they want correct form. Must write at least 2 sentences with correct form. That means every single word has the correct form. We're not considering whether it communicates the message. We're considering whether it's a perfect sentence. That's the basic level. That's the first level, A1. Right? You want at least 2 sentences with perfect form. So you could write some really advanced sentences and then miss a third person S, and the whole thing is worth nothing. Right? So it's a box ticking. Did you do it? Yes, no. And it encourages exactly the wrong kind of teaching, because the teaching is, no, that's wrong. No, that's wrong. Yes, that's right. Well done. And it's exactly that thing of discouraging questioning, discouraging having a go. So that's what I see. And it does need to change. And I think, yeah, Mr. Carl Sagan, I love how every time we say his name, we say it differently. I think he was just spotting that, you know, back in the day, but not a lot's changed.
No,
unfortunately. And I wonder if he would be shocked by that, if we could actually go back to because I guess this was in the 70s or early 80s, this video.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could like time travel and ask him and say, hey, by the way, do you think in 50 years time we'll still have this problem? He'd probably be shocked.
I'm gonna make a sweeping statement here and say that if we didn't have this problem, we wouldn't have a need. There wouldn't be so much of a need or a popularity for people like Carl, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox, because people want that. They are still curious. They just don't show it in the classroom. So, you know, later in life, they'll go and ask those questions, and, you know, they'll be answered by these video teachers. So I would speculate that if we were to have the educational change that he speaks about, that a series like Cosmos would look very different and might not actually be about, because it would already been taught or covered just like
it would just give it a scope to take it to the next level, though. Yeah, because maybe. You can always take things to the next level. It just mean that, you know, maybe people would be more aware of the things he's talking about, so you can talk about more advanced things instead.
Yeah.
And you could say also, yeah, I mean, maybe people would have less interest. I think people would have the same interest, but I think what you'd find is that we get a lot more people like him. Mm-hmm. So a lot more people are just like him naturally. Because how do you become like him? It's a personality thing. And that's the thing. This kind of thing, it does become a personality. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just an educational thing in the classroom. It forms people's personality. People become more willing to have a go or not. If you're the type of person who is really willing to have a go and doesn't mind whether you fail or not, people think that that's a personality thing. You know, they're like, oh, yeah, you know, he doesn't give a damn. He'll have a go anyway. And it's like, well, yeah, it is kind of personality, but also it was crafted by the system. This was the lucky guy who perhaps didn't get punished quite so harshly for making a mistake, or maybe just happened to get everything right in school, so he didn't get shut down, you know.
Yeah.
So,
and one more thing that he was a big advocate for in pushing, you know, science education and, you know, critical thinking and, you know, experimenting, which is basically, you know, making mistakes and seeing, the consequences and learning from them. He was education's role in democracy. He was very concerned that an ignorant electorate that has minimal or reduced understanding of scientific concepts and technology would have a large effect, negative effect on democracy, and on being a functioning democracy, because we would not have the tools in place to understand concepts that we would have to, that would affect the way that we vote. And I think that one of that does come through, like, this is post-pandemic, this is post-COVID-19, and there was a great need for scientific understanding, a base level, and very good science communicators, and you kind of just look at what happened with that. It's almost like there's a huge divide, and yeah, you kind of in a limbo of what is scientifically correct, what's not. Maybe it's a mix of both. How do you navigate that? And if you don't have that basis of a strong scientific education, how do you navigate that? And
That's
then
right.
how do you be informed to make good decisions, to make informed decisions when you go and get older, to become part of the electorate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. And I think it's an extremely good point. I didn't realize that he thought that. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important. It's absolutely true as well. Education and democracy are so critical, because when you actually force democracy on a place where they haven't had a good education system, it collapses.
Mm-hmm.
Or becomes totally obviously corrupt. And I think to some extent we understand that pretty much all democracies have some corruption in them. It's impossible to consider that there's going to be no corruption, right?
Yeah, it's the
Is anyone
sprinkles on the
really
cake,
going to say
baby.
that there's no corruption in their democracy? You know what I mean? Like, give me a break.
It's the spice on the steak.
How much did they pay you to say that? So but then there's some that are so obviously corrupt from the outside. You just look at it and you go, yeah, that's, we have terms like banana republic, don't we? For a reason.
Mm-hmm.
That there are banana republics, that are so obviously fake elections, and, oh, look, he just happened to get 98% of the vote. Yeah. Okay. So that tends to come down to an educational issue. I mean, if you have a society where, you've only just started educating the entire population, of course, that's going to be a massive problem for democracy, a massive problem. So I think, yeah, it's a critical point. And I guess, broadly speaking, the better educated or the better thinkers your population are, the more positive effects that you're going to get from democracy.
Yeah. I think it was that it ties back to that Churchill quote where he's like, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. So, but that's kind of that. I mean, apart from that kind of a quasi-elitist statement of him, it's like, why would there be educational reform or change? And whoever is doing that is the particular party in power. So would you not want the reform to be leveraged in a way that it's like gerrymandering education, so that these people would vote how you would want them to vote anyway? You know what I mean?
They do that anyway.
It's so
yeah,
complex.
I know what you mean, but
yeah.
that's almost unavoidable. Even if people don't even want to encourage any bias, even if the system itself isn't biased, the truth is that even a teacher with really good intentions, they're going to have some political sway over their students, even if they really try not to. And I think a lot of them actually don't try not to. So, that part is unfortunately kind of unavoidable. But the idea is that if you can teach people to question and to be critical thinkers, then it doesn't bloody matter what you say.
And to go through the process of the scientific method, that process of what was our video on Richard Feynman, what was his summary of the scientific method, where he's just like, we come up with an idea and then we test the idea, and if the idea is wrong, then we throw it out, and if the idea is good, then we run with it and test it a bit more, and other people test it, and that's basically the scientific method. I think something like that should be more ingrained, especially within science education, rather than just relaying facts and doing experiments. Just getting them to kind of go through that process, it would automatically cover creativity, would cover critical thinking, would cover collaboration, dare I say communication as well.
I would definitely approach things a little bit differently, because I would go further than that myself. I don't think just because we stamp scientific method on something, I don't think that makes it infallible, even if it's followed, even if it's ostensibly followed to the T.
No, because you have to also understand with the scientific method that we have ingrained in biases, and how to conduct an actual experiment that's not already skewed in one particular way, and how difficult that can actually be. Is
and also we're not infallible. People make mistakes.
Yeah.
You carry out an experiment and you make mistakes. This has happened.
But that's why the emphasis should be put at the end, where it has to be repeatable by a whole bunch of other different people.
That's right.
Have nothing related to you, no skin in the game.
That's right.
At that point, we can kind of start to gather a consensus.
Yeah, totally.
On what is correct.
I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things this is why we do need to get into the Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox thing, because this is where I'm quite cynical about the whole I effing love science movement, because people are not just sticking to the scientific method with that. Right. So it's not always about an experiment with repeatable results. Sometimes they'll use other things and say it's science, like statistical analysis. Well, statistical analysis is not the scientific method. Statistical analysis is using correlations between variables to try and see patterns. And there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
A lot of problems with that. One of which is that a lot of the time people don't look at enough variables. They just look at one or two variables and say, right, this is obviously what's causing this. And it's like, no, that's a very basic fallacy, and we don't know that for sure. So, and even if you have a scientific theory to back it up, that doesn't make it true. To actually perform an experiment and test it out, you have to really be able to do it in a lab, in a controlled environment.
Yeah.
And you can't do that for everything.
No, you cannot.
Because when we're talking about the whole planet, it's difficult to do those kinds of tests.
Yeah, and when they're talking about these statistical, it always reminds me of marketing, in that, like the numbers are what you make of them. So like you go in with a skewed idea, and often at times it can be like that when looking at that realm, because, as you say, you can't take into account all the variables, or you omit variables that would be really pertinent, but the way you present that information, will
And then there's areas like biology, which, we don't fully understand. A lot of that's based on statistics. Remember there was a study that came out 2 years ago, and they found out, this study appeared to show that there was no relationship between I don't want to misquote it. I'm going to just have to say what I think it was, which was serotonin levels in the brain and depression.
Yeah.
Right. Or it was the relationship between SSRIs and serotonin levels. It was one or the other, but basically it was the whole thing that they thought that SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these are the most common antidepressants that people take. Mm-hmm. The whole reason why they thought they worked is that they regulated serotonin. Mm-hmm. And basically this study conclusively proved biologically that that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. Well, not conclusively, because it was based on how depressed people are, which is a subjective measurement. So you have to take that into account, that it's, often depression is measured by self-reporting. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's not quite as scientific as we'd like it to be, but it was pretty solid. But what we do know is that statistically, depression is not cured, but managed well, and often improved. The condition of depression is highly improved by taking SSRIs. Mm-hmm. So what basically what they had to conclude was SSRIs work, but they don't work because of their action on serotonin.
Yeah.
So now it's like, yeah, they work, but we have no fucking idea why they work.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that you have to just accept a lot of the times with science, is a lot of the stuff we don't know why something is the way it is, but we do know it works. And at some point we might find that, those SSRIs, they're working, but it's also affecting us very negatively in another way. Like the way that they talk about like alcohol or something like that, where they say, oh, a drink a day will help you live longer, and I think they kind of were like figured out that, oh, actually it thins your blood, and it's basically like equivalent of having a baby aspirin a day or something like that, which was much better for your health, and that was the mechanism or whatever. But I think it's one of my problems with the science is often the way that it's reported, and this is why like we need more people like Carl Sagan that conveys science in a way that's more appropriate and without the incentivization of modern media to sensationalize things. Like the one that I always come back to is the amount of times that modern media news outlets use relative risk rather than absolute risk. So the famous example is bacon. Bacon causes cancer, and it was something like 4% of people get cancer. Something I'm butchering this, and then they found out that daily bacon eaters, 1 out of 100 or something like that, there's a 5% chance of getting cancer. So when you look at relative risk between someone that eats bacon and doesn't eat bacon, it's like 20% increase. It's a big increase because of the relative risk. But absolute risk, it's still very, 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 very low, right? There's a marginal difference between if you eat bacon or not to the overall risk of getting cancer. So, you couldn't outright say, well, eat bacon, it's better for you, but you could just say it's really not that much of a difference.
Yeah. But
then you read in the news, 18% increase of cancer risk when eating bacon. And that's compared to your chance of getting cancer anyway, if you don't eat it. But because of the relativity, it makes it look so big. But the absolute risk is so slow. Is so low And
Right.
you know, this is kind of a concept that should be covered in school,
Right.
but is not. Well, maybe it is nowadays, but
No.
maybe it's not the way. Maybe it's not. It's not conveyed in such a manner that makes it digestible and understandable, and it's really
Yeah.
pertinent. Like imagine doing like something like relativity, and they're coming out with statistics, and that's what you're going to be making votes on. You know, like and it could be the difference between, you know, how many houses has this government built compared to this government, and then you're still like, well, this is still bollocks. No one's really built any houses. It's just you've built one more than the other party. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's how you change that, how you look at that. If it's just education or if it's a whole societal thing, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that these conversations that we have when we look at these teaching masters and we look at our React videos get people thinking and get people communicating, because it's one of the reasons that we have this channel. But I'd love to hear people out there what you thought of Carl Sagan, what you think about in relation to, you know, the deeper topics that us looking into him came about. You know, leave it in the comments below. Send us an email at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com, and I'm going to pass it over to Rich now to give his final thoughts on Carl, on the topics that we've touched upon, and to just lay it down for you in the most succinct, profound way possible.
I'm not going to do that. I thought what I would do, though, is I'll just give some food for thought for our viewers to finish up, because it sounded like some of the ideas you were talking about there were related to the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I found that book absolutely amazing to read. I think I need to reread it. And I would highly recommend it for anyone who wants to understand better the kind of statistical fallacies that Neil was just talking about, because they're well explained in that book. And not only are they well explained, but also it looks at our how we fall into those traps and the traps that we fall into them, and why it seems to us to intuitively be one way, but when we actually look at the statistics, it's another. And it's very useful, I think, to be familiar with those kinds of issues, so that you can question yourself when you find yourself getting into that issue in the future. And I think, okay, summarizing up and thinking about sort of final thoughts on the whole thing, I think we can separate the two major spheres that Carl Sagan brings to education into two separate camps, one of which is the individual teacher and the other is the system. And in terms of the individual teacher, I think we can say that to be passionate about your subject is important, and he displays that. And to encourage your students to be passionate about the subject. And we can see that with him and also with Mr. Rogers. And then moving on to the system, I think the key takeaway there is the system should be encouraging questioning as well as having a go. Questioning and having a go. And whenever you're in a situation that someone isn't encouraging that, that's a problem. I'd like to talk more about that right now, but we don't have time. But you see it at all levels, and especially at university, where they should really know better, and they'll quite happily bang on about how they want to encourage people to have a go and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, they'll be quicker than ever to shut someone down who has an idea that's different to the ideas that they're teaching. It's a problem.
Perfect. Well said. And remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below in letting us know what you think of this episode. If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/Professor Rich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG Space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click off. Thank you.
Bye.